I'm going to read the book, The Best Nest, for you. We read another book by P.D. Eastman. It was called Are You My Mother? So this one, The Best Nest, is one of my favorites also. It's just so cute. When I'm done reading this, as a follow-up, you can write in your journal one page that just answers this question. If you were a bird, what do you think would make the best nest? Can you design a nest? Just like when you designed your tree house or your igloo, it doesn't have to be real. Maybe you have a nest that's got a little leaf hammock in it, or little rocks to sit on to make a little rock couch. So you can use your imagination, be creative, and imagine if you were a bird, how would you create the best nest? The best nest. That's a mailbox. Mr. Bird was happy. He was so happy he had to sing. This was Mr. Bird's song. I love my house, I love my nest, in all the world my nest is best. Then Mrs. Bird came out of the house. It's not the best nest, she said. I'm tired of this old place, said Mrs. Bird. I hate it. Let's look for a new place right now. So they left the old place to look for a new one. This place looks nice, said Mr. Bird. Let's move in here. Ooh, they're going to go into a cavity. A cavity is a hole in a tree where a bird might build a nest. But somebody else had already moved in. So they looked at another house. This one looks nice, said Mr. Bird, and there's nobody in it. Oh, you're wrong, said Mrs. Bird. This house belongs to a foot. So they went on looking. I like this one, said Mr. Bird. It has a pretty red flag on the roof. I've always wanted a house with a flag, said Mrs. Bird. Maybe this place will be all right. But it was not all right. I guess I made a mistake, said Mr. Bird. You make too many mistakes, said Mrs. Bird. There's no such thing as too many mistakes. I'm going to pick the next house, and here it is, right here. They flew in. They looked around. Isn't it too big? Asked Mr. Bird. I like this big place, said Mrs. Bird. This is the place to build our new nest. They went right to work. They needed many things to build their nest. First, they got some hay. That's a lot of hay. They got some soda straws and broom straws. They got some sweater string. They got some stocking string and mattress stuffing. They got some horse hair. They got some man hair. Soon they had all the hay, all the straw, all the string, all the stuffing, all the horsehair, and all the man hair they could carry. They took it all back to build their nest. That's what birds do. They'll take anything that looks stringy or soft or fluffy, anything. They call it nesting materials, anything that they can use to build a nest. Mr. and Mrs. Bird worked very hard. It took them the rest of the morning to finish their nest. This nest is really the best, said Mrs. Bird. I want to stay here forever. Mr. Bird was very happy too. He flew to the top of his house. He sang his song again. I love our house, I love our nest. In all the world our nest is best. He was so busy singing, he didn't even see Mrs. Parker coming. Every day at 12 o'clock, I meant to say Mr. Parker came to the church. Mr. Parker came to pull a rope. The rope went up to the bird's new nest. The rope rang the big bell right under Mrs. Bird's nest. Bong, bong, bong. Oh no. Mrs. Bird got out of there as fast as she could fly. Bong, bong, bong. When Mr. Bird came in, all he could see was a mess of hay and string and stuffing and horsehair and man hair and straws. Where was Mrs. Bird? I will look for her until I find her, said Mr. Bird. He looked high. He looked low. He looked everywhere for Mrs. Bird. He looked down into a chimney, but Mrs. Bird wasn't there. He looked down into a water barrel, but Mrs. Bird wasn't there. Then he saw a big fat cat. There was a big fat smile on the fat cat's face. There were some pretty brown feathers near the fat cat's mouth. Mr. Bird began to cry. "Oh dear," he cried. "This big fat cat has eaten Mrs. Bird." He's inferring that. He didn't see Mrs. Bird in the mouth, but he has some clues, and he knows that cats could eat birds, so he is inferring what he thinks happened. Mr. Bird flew off. "I'll never see Mrs. Bird again," he cried. It was getting dark. It began to rain. It rained harder and harder. Mr. Bird could not see where he was going. Crash! Mr. Bird bumped into something. It was his old house. That old house that Mrs. Bird hated. "I'll go inside," said Mr. Bird. "I'll rest here until the rain stops." Mr. Bird went in, and there was Mrs. Bird sitting there singing. "I love my house, I love my nest. In all the world, this nest is best." "You? Here?" gasped Mr. Bird. "I thought you hated this old nest." Mrs. Bird smiled. "I used to hate it," she said, "but a mother bird can change her mind. You see, there's no nest like an old nest for a brand new bird." She had an egg to lay. And when the egg popped open, the new bird thought so too. We talked a little bit about perspective last week, perspectives of different characters and how one character can see things one way and a different character could see things another way. Something different happened in this book. In the beginning, Mrs. Bird had one perspective of this birdhouse with the nest in it. She didn't like it. She thought that she could do a lot better. Then she went out in the world and tried things and checked things out and tried all these different spots. And in the end, her perspective changed. Her perspective of the old house was totally different. She found out and she changed her perspective about how she felt about this nest. She actually discovered that it was the perfect place. It was safe and warm and cozy and just the right size to build a new nest and lay a brand new egg. Sometimes our perspectives change over time, and that's what happened to her. So go ahead and get out your a writing notebook, and I want you to write that if you were a bird, what do you think would make a perfect nest? And it's okay to be silly and creative with it. Okay, I'd love to hear them later.